Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. This video is simply my thoughts and reaction to the news of the death of Gene Hackman at 95. There have been many tributes that have been pouring in over the last few days, and I felt the need to put together something in video form. Hackman was not only one of our screen legends in terms of great actors whose names alone carried audience interest, but he was just an incredible performer with such a unique style that was immediately recognizable, but also very hard to pinpoint. He was, of course, a method actor who had spent years honing his craft, and his career didn't really have that major breakthrough point until his friend Warren Beatty brought him into Bonnie and Clyde after their successful collaboration on the film Lilith a few years before. And then, of course, in 1971 came the role that cemented his cinematic legacy forever, and, of course, won him the Best Actor Oscar for Popeye Doyle in The French Connection. That being the film, the role, and the performance that cemented in the public's minds that not only was Gene Hackman a great film star, but one of the great actors, and one of the great actors to watch and to come to a film for simply because you saw his name on the credits or on the marquee back when we still had those. One of the reasons why I think myself and a lot of others have expressed over the years our disappointment that Gene Hackman had retired after Welcome to Mooseport in 2004 was that his talents were such that the craft of acting was really invisible in his performances. You never saw the the machinery of the performance. It was always a complete and total characterization. It didn't matter what the film was. It didn't matter what the tone was. Every time Gene Hackman was in a film, you got the sense that you were actually watching a character. You were experiencing a character in individual moments in time, and the never-ending sea of emotions that play beneath the surface. This is, of course, chiefly there in Popeye Doyle, who on the surface is a character that no audience should love or associate with. And yet, in spite of all of this character's horrible negative aspects, it is the dogged pursuit of Frog One and the dedication to the job and the sort of sense of duty at the cost of everything else, even if any semblance of outward humanity was given over to the sort of outward armor of being a police detective in New York and sort of giving in to the outward posturing at the expense of one's own humanity. All of those elements should add up to a character that nobody would care about. Nobody would care if they lived or died. But if you look at the performance in The French Connection and any Gene Hackman performance, you'll quickly start to realize when you look very closely at what he's doing from an acting perspective, it's all little subtle things. It's always a performance that's in each and every moment. There's no sense of artifice, and there's little touches of humanity, and it's still there in Popeye Doyle. There's a sense of obsession, of course, but there's also resentment and bitterness and fear and desire and anxiety, and of course the character's inherent racism and all of this sort of cocktail of good and bad all compressed down into one extraordinarily driven and overbearing character that you come to actually love and appreciate in a strange way over the course of the film. That is why it's still really the centerpiece Gene Hackman performance, as it was what really cemented him as one of the great screen legends. It would of course be the kind of role and of course Oscar-winning performance that most actors or casting directors or directors would expect to repeat time and time again, or to go back to that particular well and just pull from that, and instead of trying to break new ground. But in the 70s particularly, Hackman was at his busiest and never seemed to be a person who was willing to do that. Every performance, every film, every character is different and unique and stands on its own. And he had this incredible ability to be able to move between light and dark elements in terms of actual emotions at such the drop of a hat that every performance is so incredibly natural. Again, his craft is so invisible. It's so interwoven into each and every performance, regardless of what the actual film is about or what genre it's in or even the actual quality of the finished film itself. Each performance is really like a well-refined diamond that's been, reduced down and cut perfectly, so it is as if it was always that way in the first place, as if it emerged from the ground perfectly formed. So he's one of the great actors who was never really very showy in the sense that a lot of stars can be, and so the subtlety of his acting, I think, wasn't always as appreciated as it could have been. I think more so now, but just being able to look at the range of performances across his entire career. I mean, going from Popeye Doyle into films like Scarecrow, and then going into the incredible performance of Harry Caul in The Conversation, one of the most deeply internalized lead performances in any American film. And then doing a 180 in the next year, 1975, and doing a sequel to The French Connection 2, repairing him with John Frankenheimer, who had directed him in the excellent Gypsy Moss. But that film could have been a straightforward sequel to The French Connection without any of William Friedkin's energy, and of course could have just been a basic script that was just rehashing elements of the first film. But instead, they transposed the whole story to France. They made Popeye Doyle a fish out of water. The whole film is a very introspective character study of a character who is already incredibly messed up after the events of the first film and was not in great mental health to begin with, shall we say. So it's a character study about a character who is now taken out of his element and driven only by his obsession from the first film and being a fish out of water. And it took real bravery, I think, to make a sequel like that. And really, the 70s was about the only time you could get away with something like that. So The French Connection 2 really defies expectations, and Hackman builds upon his already famous character in quite notable and unexpected ways. But then in the same year, he gives what I think is, if I had to choose not only my favorite Gene Hackman performance, but I think the most comprehensive of all of his talents and arguably his best performance, it's in Arthur Penn's 1975 masterpiece Night Moves, written by the great Alan Sharp. This is, for me, the most underrated of all what are termed neo-noir films. It's one of the great 70s films. It's arguably the most 70s film of 70s films due to its unrelenting darkness and, of course, its incredible ending. As Harry Mosby in Night Moves, Hackman has such a range of emotional responses and quiet moments and louder moments. There's elements, of course, of the extraordinarily downtrodden, broken, morose man who is essentially fumbling his way through his new career of private detective with just this incredible sense of trying to have at least some sense of detached humor as a coping mechanism to deal with the churning anxieties of unending self-loathing and internal rage. So it's a performance that has such notes of cynicism and humor even tinged in, but also with the incredible writing of Alan Sharp. There are moments in the film that really carve out those small moments in time where it just basically stops the film and the film literally lives in that entire moment. And it's not just the dialogue, but it's the moments in between the dialogue and how the actors are playing it, where they are, of course, no longer actors. For people who know the film, for me, the key little moment is the dialogue that happens between characters, where the Kennedy assassination is referenced, and the lines are, where were you when Kennedy got shot? The response, which Kennedy? Which is then responded by any Kennedy. And that little exchange right there, that little quiet moment in the middle of the night, that for me is possibly the most representative moment of what is 1970s cinema, what is the American film landscape like at this point in time. It is an incredible film that is not talked about enough. Thankfully, it's talked about more now. Ironically, the Criterion Collection is about to bring out a 4K UHD release and new deluxe edition at the end of this month. So, of course, that was unplanned to coincide with this news, but I just found it rather ironic in a way that what is, I think, arguably Hackman's greatest performance and his most underrated film is actually seeing a new reissue this month. So no matter the size of the role, whether it was a leading role or a character part, Hackman always brought this sense of gravitas, of not necessarily a gruffness that he was really characterized for especially, but a gravitas in a dramatic sense that, when he showed up on screen, he was going to be a character that was in the moment, and you weren't thinking about the actor or the star persona. You were invested in the drama of the scene, and that elevated everyone else, and it elevated the scene itself because of the energy and the conviction he had. And the way he could play all of the little fleeting emotions that run through the human mind at any given time is also a great segue to talk about how exceptionally good he was at playing comedy, which is something you wouldn't really expect from an actor of such standing and known for things like The French Connection. And I think his penchant for comedy and his ability to underplay a line so beautifully and adhere to the number one rule of comedy that a character is only funny when they don't know they're being funny. If a character knows that they're being funny, then it's no longer funny. He instinctively knew that. And so when he asked to do things like The Blind Hermit and Young Frankenstein, the joy of the performance is seeing Gene Hackman getting to just, basically stretch out and utilize some of his talents that he wasn't able to do a lot. And so over time, over the course of his career, he was able to do that a bit more and more. But for such a powerhouse of a dramatic actor to be able to just, without any sort of hesitation, be able to play comedy with absolute skill as if it was second nature. That's one of the best examples, I think, to try and explain why Gene Hackman was such a great actor, because that's not an easy thing to do. Not everyone can do that, to be able to move back and forth between intensive drama and intensive comedy, and also play roles that have a foot in either camp and also move back and forth, because that requires the most adroit of actors. And in a lot of ways, I think one of his most underrated performances is entirely composed of sort of dancing between that line of drama and comedy. And that's actually the role of Lex Luthor in Superman 1 and 2, and of course later in Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Because that version of Lex Luthor is, at least in certain areas, obviously designed to be more of a comedic figure at the start, to provide a lot of funny one-liners and moments to entertain the audience, and not necessarily being out-and-out villainous 100% all the way through. It means that could have very easily gone over into being a bit campy, or it could have been not effective as a threat in terms of the arch villain of Superman being played too much for laughs. And when you first see the film, Hackman is, of course, hysterically funny as Luthor, but he also makes sure to never overdo it, because that sort of performance, that sort of character in all of those moments could very easily get a bit grating. And so if you look at the actual writing of that character from Tom Mankiewicz and others, and you look at Hackman's performance, there's always this degree of there's a little bit of gravitas underneath it, and the humor is also in Lex Luthor's exasperation, the greatest criminal mastermind of our times, stuck with a bunch of morons, and he's surrounded by Philistines. So some of the humor is also at the character's own expense. But the real genius of the performance comes in not just being able to never let that character get too much or get to be an annoyance to the audience, that we're getting more of the same, and the threat is incredible. Because when the actual plot is revealed in Superman the movie, that underlying sense of gravitas suddenly comes to the surface, and all the laughs sort of die down. It's a masterful performance of being able to suddenly have that rug be pulled out from under the audience, and there's the credible threat of Lex Luthor, greatest criminal mastermind of our times, who's not afraid to kill untold millions just in a scheme for money. And I don't know if there was really anybody else at the time who could have played that particular rendition of Lex Luthor in Superman 1 and 2 with that degree of dexterity, of being able to dance on that sort of knife edge between comedy and drama, and especially having enough of that sense of gravity, that gravitas in the performance, even when it's a character who is being funny and doing jokes for most of the movie, but to have enough of that gravitas underneath that to when we have the villain plot reveal, all of a sudden that element takes over. What was sort of on a slow burn the whole time, then suddenly that flame gets cranked up, and because it was always there, that's what makes the whole character so rewarding. Because not only is he an entertaining character, but you've also got the threat for Superman. You have the dramatic aspects of the story fulfilled. So it's another of the great Gene Hackman performances that I don't know if it necessarily gets examined as closely as I've already been talking about it, because it's an incredible performance of blending light and dark aspects and continually tiptoeing around the edge of drama and comedy. But again, when things get serious, suddenly that gravitas fully takes over. You realize how dangerous this version of Luthor is, and he does then live up to the Lex Luthor character. And then what was funny in the first sections of the film, suddenly those add chilling aspects to the character. So the little smiles and asides that Hackman is doing as Luthor, suddenly they're no longer funny. They have venom in them. They have menace in them that wasn't necessarily there at first. So I think that is perhaps the role to look at, to see the incredible ability that Gene Hackman had to not just play individual moments and really find the little surges and constant balance of emotions that characters go through, but his incredible ability to not only play comedy, but his ability to blend the drama and comedy together to where they are fully meshed, and there's no real division between the two. As Hackman's career progressed and he sort of grew out of major 70s leading man status into the films of the 1980s, and then eventually by the 1990s, he was usually being cast in more and more of character parts or supporting parts. He remained one of the great actors who never let that get in the way of the performance. It was always about the character, and in each film, again, regardless of how well the film itself may have eventually turned out or what the actual genre was, with each of these films, when you knew Gene Hackman was in it, or Gene Hackman appeared on screen, you as an audience member immediately knew that you were getting your money's worth, that the premise, the dramatic premise of the scene or the film story was going to be fulfilled, because this was someone who always showed up and gave each character 200%, and never with a sign of artifice or never with the sign of having any of the process visible. There was always a complete and total sort of performance, and also never really a sense of repeating oneself, because again, I think a lot of people would be either tempted or encouraged to sort of repeat successful elements. So when you look at a film like Mississippi Burning, there are similarities in the Hackman character to the character of Popeye Doyle, but if you put the two characters side by side, the performances side by side, they are completely different. And the way that Hackman portrays that particular character's internal demons, and how he struggles with the incredible evils he is confronted with in that film, that's what actually manages to drive a lot of the drama in terms of it's that character's reactions that keep moving the story forward and help to make that such a striking film. But it, again, is a completely different character and characterization to Popeye Doyle. And then in the 1990s, Hackman would be in certain films, for example, where he didn't really have all that much screen time, but they were films of a certain level of intelligence that had great ideals to them, and he would take a supporting role, but his mere appearance, even if he didn't have that much screen time, added so much dramatic weight to the proceedings that the whole film benefited. I'm in particular thinking of films like Geronimo, An American Legend, and also the long version of Wyatt Earp, which is only released on Laserdisc. It's a little longer than the theatrical cut, but in either version, playing the father of the Earps, Hackman has such a presence in so little screen time that it's really the pivotal character of that entire film, and even the trailers for that film use some of his dialogue as the main voiceover for the trailer to sell the film. So I think that's also a great testament to the strength of his performances, that even in a very long film that he's only in as a supporting character for a short amount of time, he's not only the pivotal character, but also they wound up having to use some of his dialogue to actually properly sell the film. In a lot of his later roles, he also started sort of using more of that inherent gravitas he always had. And so you see that in films like Unforgiven, but you also see it in the comedies that he would do. And that sort of gravitas with almost a slight tinge of perhaps a grouchiness in a way was such a unique blend of personality traits that it made those roles more fascinating, and none of those were simple. I mean, you just look at his performance in Get Shorty and compare that to the Royal Tenenbaums, and they're two brilliant comedic performances with dramatic and realistic elements. You completely buy and believe both of those characters as people who would really exist somewhere, and also characters that you couldn't quite put your finger on. You couldn't quite figure them out 100%, and that, of course, makes them more fascinating to watch and follow. And they're both hysterically funny performances at the same time. But, of course, again, entirely different from one another. He was, of course, still giving fantastic dramatic performances in the 90s in films such as Crimson Tide, and interestingly, in Enemy of the State, where he is, of course, essentially reprising the Harry Caul character from The Conversation, but never really doing it in name. And that's another example of an actor really dedicated to performance, because that could have just been reprising the same character, just not doing it in name, and just kind of doing more of the same. And when you look at that performance, it's really a brand new characterization that you could read either as the original Harry Call character from The Conversation or an entirely different character. It's kind of left up to the audience, but it is very much heavily implied that it is the same character down to some surviving traits. But that's a fascinating performance to look at from that aspect, because there's an actor going back to one of their famous roles in a sense and bringing them forward several decades and playing around with what that would mean for that particular character's mindset and how would they react to the world at that point after all that time, and where basically where would their head be at that point in time, and then dropping that characterization into the story of Enemy of the State, which is a completely different type of film in terms of genre and tone from the original Conversation. So that adds multiple different levels to that film that otherwise probably would have been a much more straightforward action thriller. Of course, as I mentioned, Hackman retired in 2004 after Welcome to Mooseport, which was his final film, and that was actually a film I saw first run theatrically years and years ago, so I actually do remember that film. But he, of course, was able to enjoy his retirement, but had many different other pastimes and activities and different interests, and then even turned to fiction writing. He authored and co-authored 5 different books, which I did manage to find a copy of Escape from Andersonville, which I'm really excited to read. So now I really want to track down all of the books that he worked on in his retirement, and I'm really curious to read those. I always find it really interesting and very admirable in a lot of ways when famous people who are specifically known for a particular field then decide to try something completely new or follow their interests wherever they may go. So having one of the great actors suddenly decide they wanted to try fiction writing and really move into a completely different field and throw caution to the wind and basically go in without any sort of experience in that area, I just find incredibly admirable. And so now I'm really wanting to read all of his published books. In any case, I just wanted to put something together as my own sort of thoughts and at least a small tribute in some form to someone who is not only one of the great American actors, but someone who always had that feeling of absolute conviction on screen and always gave that sense that they had fully invested themselves in not only the profession of acting, but the spirit of drama itself. And I think as an audience member, you recognize that, especially when someone does this time and time and time again and has so many iconic roles that are not only immediately recognizable as that star's iconic role, but all of them are different and all of them are unique, whether it's The French Connection or The Poseidon Adventure or Superman or Night Moves or The Conversation or even some of the later films like Unforgiven or Royal Tenenbaums. Each of those performances are iconic in their own way, and each one is completely unique from one another. And that's not something everyone is able to achieve. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's a sign of somebody caring to do that and wanting to do that and insisting upon doing that, of never giving anything less than your absolute efforts, and doing so in your own way, building such an incredible career legacy of incredible performances in film after film. So, of course, like everyone else, I'm just saddened by the news of Gene Hackman's passing, but I will be revisiting his incredible filmography and looking at the books that he wrote and co-wrote, and just revisiting such an incredible body of work that has given all of us such incredible moments of drama to enjoy. So I do strongly encourage anyone interested to, of course, look into the filmography of Gene Hackman, to, of course, also look at some of the books written during his retirement, And also, if you are looking for some of the notable Hackman performances, you really do have to at least start with the iconic roles in The French Connection and The Poseidon Adventure and The Conversation. But I would also, of course, include Superman the movie and, of course, Superman 2 and Superman 4 as well. But if there were one film to recommend, I would point people to looking at The Incredible Night Moves, which is such an unbelievably multifaceted performance in a film that I think is truly underrated. That if there was one film I could point to as having perhaps the signature Gene Hackman performance, or the performance that best encapsulates, I think, all of his great talents, it would have to be Night Moves. And that's also a film I've championed for a great number of years because I just have been obsessed with it ever since I first saw it as one of the great films of the 1970s. But in any case, there are so many great performances to look back on, and in such an incredible body of work that is really, again, it's always about the work itself. It's such a cinematic legacy of incredible quality, of full effort put in, of and also not willing to just rest on one's laurels and give a performance that wasn't your absolute best. And I do think it speaks volumes that for all these years since 2004, there have been so many of us who continually would think, boy, isn't it a shame that Gene Hackman is retired, and that he doesn't do the occasional film here and there. I really miss seeing him on screen. I think that is the greatest signifier of someone not only being a great actor and a great presence on screen, but being one of the great screen icons, of earning that sort of distinction from people everywhere, of when somebody obviously decides to retire, that everybody misses them. Everybody misses them in films, and misses their uh, performance quality and dedication to the craft, and just misses their presence. I think that is the greatest signifier of just how incredibly great Gene Hackman was. So as always, I hope my babblings about classic films and great artists has been at least somewhat fun and informative. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.